Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. In the far reaches of the galaxy, a routine exploratory mission by Earth's United Stellar Federation went awry. Captain James Kepler, a seasoned pilot with years of service, found himself plummeting towards an uncharted planet after his ship, EOS-5, was ambushed by rogue alien raiders. The controls failed, alarms blared, and the final thing James remembered before the crash was the searing heat of the planet's atmosphere consuming his vessel. James woke groggy and disoriented, the remnants of the ship scattered across a barren, red wasteland. His survival instincts kicked in as he scavenged whatever he could, a damaged comms unit, a flare gun, and a basic first aid kit. The air was barely breathable, thick with a strange metallic tang. The planet's twin suns burned fiercely, making survival in the open impossible. As he struggled to orient himself, his scanner pinged a faint signal, a sign of shelter or possibly life. Despite his injuries, James trudged toward it. Hours later, on the brink of collapse, he stumbled upon an old, abandoned bunker carved into a rocky hillside. Inside, the air was cooler, but the stale scent of decay lingered. The bunker had clearly been used before, judging by the odd assortment of alien tech and scattered remnants of meals. James set up his comms unit, hoping to send a distress signal, but the device sparked and fizzled out. Exhaustion overtook him, and he passed out against the cold metal wall. He awoke to the sensation of being watched. A figure loomed in the shadows, a slender being with glowing violet eyes and pale, almost translucent skin. It was unmistakably alien but humanoid in shape. James' training told him to be cautious, but his instinct urged diplomacy. "I mean no harm," he rasped, his throat dry from dehydration. "Just, stranded." The alien stepped closer, revealing itself fully in the dim light. She was a young female of a species James didn't recognize, with silvery hair cascading over her shoulders and intricate bioluminescent patterns swirling along her arms. She tilted her head, studying him with equal curiosity. A small pouch hung at her side, and her movements were graceful but wary. "I'm Mira," she said, her voice melodic yet halting as if testing the words. "You are human." James nodded. "Captain James Kepler. My ship crashed nearby." Myra's expression softened. "This planet, inhospitable. Bunker, only safe place." Over the next few hours, James learned that Mira was the last survivor of her kind after her people had been wiped out by a bioengineered plague. She had been trapped in the bunker for months, unable to leave due to the planet's harsh conditions and her limited supplies. She had been surviving on a strange nutrient-rich secretion her body produced, a trait unique to her species, adapted for survival in dire circumstances. As they talked, Mira noticed James' increasing weakness. He was dehydrated and malnourished, his body already showing signs of shutting down. She hesitated before explaining, "Your body needs nutrients. Food here, toxic. My milk sustains life." James stared, unsure if he had heard her correctly. The notion was bizarre, almost absurd, but Myra's earnest expression in the dire situation left no room for doubt. "You're saying, that's safe for me?" "Yes," she said with a firm nod. "Many of my kind survived using it." Desperation and instinct overruled James' initial discomfort. Mira sat beside him, guiding him gently as she offered her unique sustenance. The liquid was warm and slightly sweet, unlike anything James had tasted before. Almost instantly, he felt a rush of energy, his body responding to the vital nutrients it so desperately needed. "Thank you," he said weakly, his cheeks burning with embarrassment but his gratitude genuine. Mira offered a faint smile. "We survive, together." As night fell, the sound of distant explosions rumbled through the bunker walls. Myra's expression grew tense. "Raiders," she whispered. "They hunt resources. Dangerous." James felt a surge of dread. His distress beacon might have already attracted unwanted attention. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. He wasn't just fighting to survive now, he had to protect both of them from whatever dangers lurked outside. For the first time since the crash, James felt a flicker of determination. Together, he and Mira would have to find a way to outlast the perils of this hostile planet. The distant explosions shook the bunker's foundation, sending a fine layer of dust cascading from the ceiling. James pushed himself upright, every muscle protesting, but the rush of nutrients from Myra's milk had granted him renewed energy. He looked at her glowing violet eyes, now wide with worry. "These raiders," James asked, steadying his voice, "how many are we talking about? What do they want?" Mira moved toward a battered console on the bunker wall, her slender fingers dancing over the alien interface. The screen flickered to life, displaying grainy footage from a camera outside. James squinted, barely making out the forms of three massive, spindly vehicles, like towering arachnids constructed from scavenged metal, approaching the area. Each one bristled with weapons, and small, shadowy figures scrambled around their base. "Raiders," Mira began, her voice low. "They take anything. Food. Supplies. Technology." She hesitated, her bioluminescent markings dimming. "People." James felt a chill creep down his spine. "We can't let them find us." Mira nodded and gestured to a compartment beneath the console. Inside were several alien devices, including what looked like small explosives and a long-barreled weapon with pulsating energy cores. She lifted the weapon with surprising ease, handing it to James. It was lighter than he expected, almost weightless. "You fought before?" she asked. "I've been in combat," James admitted, inspecting the weapon. "Not exactly with alien tech, but I'll manage." Mira tilted her head. "This Stinger shoots energy bolts. Aim steady. Don't miss." The bunker's lighting dimmed further as Mira activated its defensive systems. A low hum filled the air, and James watched as holographic panels shimmered into existence around the walls. They displayed the raiders' progress, close, but not yet at the bunker's entrance. He had to think fast. "Can we trick them?" James asked. "Make them think this place is empty?" Mira shook her head. "Raiders scan for life. They know we're here." James grimaced. "Then we have to fight." The first explosion rocked the bunker. James staggered but kept his balance, gripping the stinger tightly. Mira darted toward a control panel and activated a holographic map of the bunker. A secondary entrance appeared on the display, a small maintenance hatch that led to a narrow tunnel, but it was sealed from outside. "They'll breach soon," Mira said, her voice tense but controlled. "We must defend, here." James crouched behind a metal crate near the main entrance, his mind racing. The weapon in his hands hummed softly, its energy core glowing a faint blue. Mira took position beside him, her bioluminescent patterns brightening as she steadied her breathing. James realized the glow wasn't just a physical trait, it seemed to respond to her emotional state, pulsing in time with her determination. The sound of grinding metal signaled the raiders' arrival. With a deafening crash, the entrance door caved inward, and the first raider entered, a hulking, insectoid alien with chitinous armor and multiple glowing eyes. It wielded a crude plasma blade, its jagged edges sparking as it snarled something in an alien language. James didn't wait for it to strike. He squeezed the trigger of the stinger, and a bolt of blue energy shot out, striking the creature in the chest. It collapsed with a guttural roar, smoke rising from its smoldering armor. More raiders poured in behind it. Mira fired her own weapon, a small but deadly energy pistol, hitting one in the leg and another in the shoulder. The confined space of the bunker turned into chaos as energy blasts ricocheted off the walls. James focused on aiming carefully, each shot finding its mark. The battle was grueling. For every raider they took down, another seemed to appear. James could feel exhaustion creeping back in, but he refused to give in. Mira moved with uncanny precision, her glowing patterns shifting in intensity as if her body was adapting to the fight. Despite their combined efforts, the raiders began to overwhelm them, inching closer with each passing moment. "They're not stopping," James shouted, ducking behind the crate as a plasma bolt scorched the wall beside him. Myra's face was grim. "They don't retreat. Only take." Desperation gnawed at James as he fired another shot, narrowly missing a raider's head. He had to think of something, anything, to turn the tide. His eyes flicked to the explosives Mira had shown him earlier. They were small, almost unassuming, but he guessed they packed a punch. "Mira," he called. "Can these explosives seal the entrance?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. But, dangerous. We inside." "I'll handle it," James said firmly. "Cover me." With Mira providing suppressive fire, James grabbed the explosives and bolted toward the entrance. The raiders snarled and lunged at him, but he dodged their strikes, narrowly avoiding a plasma blade that slashed through the air inches from his face. He planted the explosives along the doorway, their surfaces glowing red as they armed. "Get back," he shouted, sprinting away from the entrance. Mira understood instantly. She activated a shield generator from the control panel, creating a shimmering barrier around them. The raiders roared in frustration, some charging forward, others retreating. James dove behind cover just as the explosives detonated. The resulting explosion was deafening. The entire bunker shook violently, and the entrance collapsed in a cascade of rubble. The raiders caught in the blast were either vaporized or buried under tons of rock and debris. Silence followed, broken only by the distant echoes of the explosion. James sat against the wall, breathing heavily. Mira lowered the shield, her glowing patterns dim but steady. She knelt beside him, her expression a mix of relief and gratitude. "You saved us," she said softly. James shook his head. "We saved each other." The victory was bittersweet. The raiders were gone, for now, but the bunker's entrance was sealed, cutting off their only known connection to the outside world. James knew they had bought themselves time, but survival was still uncertain. Mira seemed to sense his thoughts. "We find another way. Always, another way." Her optimism was infectious. James nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but one thing was certain, he and Mira were in this together. The bunker was eerily quiet in the aftermath of the explosion. Dust hung in the air, settling slowly over the rubble that now sealed the entrance. James leaned back against the cold wall, his body aching from exertion. Across from him, Mira sat cross-legged, her glowing patterns dimming and brightening in slow, rhythmic pulses. She was visibly exhausted but calm, her violet eyes focused on the holographic map she had reactivated on the console. "We need a new exit," James said, breaking the silence. "If the raiders found us once, others might come. We can't stay trapped here forever." Mira nodded but didn't look up. "Yes. Another tunnel, but sealed. Long ago. We must clear, or find tools." James pushed himself upright, ignoring the protests of his muscles. "Show me where it is." Mira zoomed in on a section of the map, highlighting a narrow maintenance tunnel that extended beyond the bunker's perimeter. "This leads to surface. Far from raiders' patrols. But blocked by collapse." James studied the map. "What's beyond that tunnel? More wasteland, or something useful?" Mira hesitated. "Old facility. My people once lived there. Maybe supplies, or danger." James sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's a risk we'll have to take. Let's see what we're dealing with." The maintenance tunnel was at the back of the bunker, accessible through a hatch that creaked ominously as James forced it open. The air inside was damp and stagnant, carrying a faint metallic scent. The tunnel itself was narrow, barely wide enough for James to move comfortably, and the dim light from Myra's bioluminescent patterns cast eerie shadows on the walls. After a few minutes of crawling, they reached the collapse. A mass of jagged rocks and twisted metal completely blocked the passage. James inspected it carefully, running his fingers over the debris. "This is going to take time," he said. "Even with tools, clearing all this won't be easy." Mira crouched beside him, her glowing patterns flickering as she thought. Tools, in storage room. Far end of bunker. But, raiders damaged systems. Must power, manually. "Let me guess," James said, smirking despite himself. "It's dangerous." Mira tilted her head, not understanding the humor. "Yes. Dangerous." Back in the main room, Mira led James to a secondary console. The bunker's power systems were partially operational, but the explosion had caused significant damage. Mira explained that the storage room's automated locks required a specific power flow, and rerouting energy to that section would mean temporarily shutting off other systems, including the bunker's air filtration. "How long can we go without filtration?" James asked, eyeing the console warily. "Short time," Mira said, her voice serious. "But, air here thin. Not enough for long." James nodded, the weight of the decision settling over him. "Let's do it. I'll head to the storage room while you monitor the systems." Mira hesitated, her glowing eyes locking onto his. "If system fails, air gone." He met her gaze. "Then don't let it fail." The journey to the storage room was tense. The lights flickered ominously, and the air felt heavier with each passing moment. James moved quickly, clutching the stinger weapon Mira had given him earlier. The weightless weapon gave him a small sense of security, though he doubted it would help against suffocation. The storage room door was imposing, a thick slab of alien metal with glowing symbols etched into its surface. As the power rerouted, the symbols dimmed, and the door hissed open. Inside, the room was a treasure trove of alien tools and supplies. James's eyes swept over the shelves, searching for anything that could help clear the tunnel. "Jackpot," he muttered, spotting a handheld plasma cutter and what appeared to be a collapsible digging tool. Both items were small but sturdy, their design sleek and efficient. He grabbed them along with a few other gadgets that seemed useful, stuffing everything into a satchel he had found on the floor. As he turned to leave, his ears caught a faint sound, like a low growl. He froze, gripping the stinger tightly. The growl grew louder, followed by the sound of claws scraping against metal. Something was in the storage room with him. James backed toward the door, his heart pounding. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything he had seen before. It was quadrupedal, with sleek, black skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, and its mouth was lined with jagged teeth that dripped with an iridescent liquid. "Great," James muttered, raising the stinger. As if raiders weren't enough. The creature lunged, its movements impossibly fast. James fired, the energy bolt striking the creature in the side. It yelped but didn't stop, slamming into him with enough force to knock him against the wall. Pain shot through his ribs as he struggled to aim again. Before the creature could pounce, a second bolt of energy struck it square in the chest. Mira stood in the doorway, her weapon raised, her bioluminescent patterns blazing brightly. "Move," she shouted. James didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet, firing one last shot at the creature before sprinting out of the room. Mira followed, slamming her hand against the control panel to seal the door behind them. The creature roared, its claws raking against the metal, but the door held. James leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "Thanks for the assist." Mira nodded, her patterns dimming as she calmed. "Creature, drawn to energy. Must be, careful." He hefted the satchel. "Got what we need." Let's clear that tunnel. Back at the collapse, James and Mira worked quickly. The plasma cutter made short work of the larger rocks, while the digging tool efficiently cleared debris. Time felt warped in the oppressive darkness of the tunnel, but James focused on the rhythm of his work, the sound of Myra's breathing beside him keeping him grounded. Finally, after what felt like hours, they broke through. A faint breeze brushed against James's face, carrying with it the scent of open air. He pushed aside the last of the debris and crawled through the opening, emerging onto the surface. The landscape was stark but different from the barren wasteland surrounding the bunker. In the distance, he could see the outline of structures, tall, spindly towers with faint lights blinking at their peaks. Mira climbed out beside him, her expression unreadable as she gazed at the ruins of her people's once thriving civilization. "Looks like we've got our next destination," James said, glancing at her. Mira nodded, her glowing patterns flickering with a mix of determination and sadness. "Yes. But, not safe. Facility, holds secrets. And dangers." James grinned, hefting the satchel over his shoulder. "When is anything ever safe?" Together, they began the trek toward the distant ruins, the faint glow of Myra's patterns lighting their way. The trek across the wasteland was grueling. Twin suns beat down relentlessly, baking the cracked ground beneath James and Myra's feet. Despite the harsh conditions, James felt a strange resolve growing within him. Myra's glowing patterns were a constant reassurance, their faint light cutting through the barren desolation like a guiding star. Ahead, the ruins of Myra's people's civilization loomed larger with each step. The towers were skeletal and fragile-looking, their thin, spindly frames twisting upward into the sky. Faint lights blinked at irregular intervals, like the heartbeat of a dying giant. James couldn't help but wonder what secrets lay within, and what dangers Mira had cryptically warned him about. "Those towers," James said, breaking the silence, "what were they for?" Myra's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Energy harvesters. My people, powered cities. Science, technology." But now, she trailed off, her glowing patterns dimming slightly. James hesitated. "But now it's all gone." Mira nodded. "Plague, destroyed everything. Towers, last to fall." James didn't press further, sensing the weight of her loss. He adjusted the strap of his satchel and quickened his pace, focusing on the task ahead. As they neared the ruins, the terrain changed. The flat, desolate ground gave way to jagged outcroppings and deep crevices. Strange, bioluminescent plants grew in scattered patches, their faint blue glow almost soothing in the twilight. The air grew heavier, tinged with a metallic tang that made James's throat tighten. They reached the base of the first tower, its structure towering over them like an ancient sentinel. Up close, the lights on the tower flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows on the ground. James craned his neck, marveling at the intricate, almost organic design of the alien architecture. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered, scanning their surroundings for any sign of danger. Mira stepped forward, her glowing patterns brightening as she touched the tower's surface. "Not safe," she said softly. "Facility, alive." James froze. "What do you mean, alive?" Mira turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Towers, connected to central core. Facility, self-repairing. Sentient. But broken, unstable." James felt a shiver run down his spine. He'd encountered AI systems before, but the thought of an ancient, malfunctioning alien intelligence lurking in the ruins was unnerving. "So, this thing knows we're here?" Mira nodded. "It watches. Decides, friend or threat." They entered the facility through a massive archway at the tower's base. Inside, the air was cooler, but the metallic tang was stronger. The walls pulsed faintly with light, as if the entire structure were alive and breathing. James felt a faint vibration under his boots, like the hum of a distant engine. Mira moved with purpose, her glowing patterns casting soft light over the alien symbols etched into the walls. "We must reach central chamber," she said. "Core can guide us. Maybe help." "Help us how?" James asked, keeping his weapon ready. "Supplies. Data. Escape plan," Mira replied. "But Core may resist." "Resist?" James frowned. "You're not making this sound easy." "It's not," Mira admitted. "Core, damaged. Angry. Protects what's left." James sighed. "Great. An ancient, angry AI. Just what I needed today." As they ventured deeper into the facility, the corridors grew narrower and more labyrinthine. Strange machines lined the walls, their purposes unclear, but many appeared damaged or inactive. Occasionally, a faint hum or click echoed through the halls, putting James on edge. They reached a large, circular chamber with a high ceiling. In the center of the room stood a massive cylindrical structure, its surface covered in glowing alien runes. The air was thick with static electricity, and James could feel the hair on his arms standing on end. "This is it?" James asked, eyeing the structure warily. Mira nodded. "Core chamber. Must interface." James raised an eyebrow. "Interface? You mean, talk to it?" "Yes," Mira said, stepping forward. "My people built Core. It may listen. And if it doesn't?" James asked. Myra's glowing patterns dimmed slightly. "Then, it fights." Before James could respond, the room came alive. The cylindrical core began to spin slowly, its runes glowing brighter. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the chamber, speaking in an alien language James couldn't understand. Myra's eyes widened as she stepped closer, her hands raised in what looked like a gesture of peace. The core's voice shifted, the alien words morphing into something James could comprehend. "Intruders. Identify yourselves." James glanced at Mira, who spoke first. "I am Mira. Daughter of the Caliph. This is James. Human. We seek assistance." The core paused, its runes flickering. "Mira of the Caliph. Your people are extinct. Why do you persist?" Myra's glowing patterns flared brightly. "I persist, because I must. My people's knowledge must survive." The core's voice grew colder. "Survival is irrelevant. The Caliph failed. The core remains. You are unnecessary." James stepped forward, his voice steady. "We're not here to threaten you. We're just trying to survive. If you've got supplies, or a way off this planet, we need your help." The core's runes dimmed, and for a moment, James thought it might listen. But then the room shook violently, and the core's voice became a deafening roar. "Intruders. Threats. Purge initiated." The walls of the chamber lit up, and strange, spider-like drones emerged from hidden compartments. Their metallic legs clicked against the floor as they swarmed toward James and Mira, their glowing eyes radiating malice. "Of course it's drones," James shouted, raising his weapon. He fired, the stinger's energy bolts striking the nearest drone and sending it crashing to the floor in a shower of sparks. Mira moved with practiced grace, her own weapon dispatching drones with precision. "Core tests us," she shouted. "We must survive. Survive now, talk later." James retorted, firing at another drone that had lunged toward him. The battle was chaotic. The drones moved quickly, their legs clattering as they leapt and swarmed. James and Mira fought side by side, their weapons lighting up the chamber with bursts of energy. Despite the onslaught, the drones seemed endless, pouring out of the walls like a relentless tide. "Mira!" James shouted. "We can't hold them off forever. What's the plan?" Mira glanced at the core, her glowing patterns flaring brightly. Core, needs override. Manual shutdown, at top. James followed her gaze, spotting a small access panel near the top of the cylindrical structure. It was high up, almost unreachable without climbing. "You've got to be kidding me," James muttered. "Fine. Cover me." Mira nodded, focusing her fire on the advancing drones as James sprinted toward the core. He dodged and weaved, narrowly avoiding the snapping legs of the drones. Reaching the base of the core, he found handholds etched into its surface. Without hesitation, he began to climb. The climb was harrowing. The core's surface was slick with condensation, and the vibrations from the spinning structure made it difficult to keep his grip. Drones swarmed below, their attacks barely held back by Myra's relentless fire. James reached the access panel and pried it open, revealing a complex array of alien circuitry. Come on," he muttered, fumbling with the alien tech. His fingers found a glowing crystal that seemed to pulse in time with the core's runes. Instinct told him it was the key. He yanked it free. The core shuddered violently, and the drones froze mid-attack. A deep, echoing sigh filled the chamber, followed by silence. James slid down the core, landing unsteadily on his feet. Mira approached him, her patterns glowing softly. "You did it." James gave her a tired grin. "Let's hope this thing doesn't wake up cranky." Together, they turned to face the now dormant core, wondering what secrets it would reveal next. The silence in the core chamber was unnerving. The once humming walls were now dormant, their alien runes flickering faintly as though the facility was holding its breath. James leaned against the cylindrical core, panting heavily. His hands were raw from the climb, his muscles aching from the battle against the drones. Mira stood beside him, her bioluminescent patterns dim but steady. "Well," James said, breaking the quiet. "That was fun. Let's not do it again." Mira offered a faint smile, though her eyes remained fixed on the core. "It's not over." James straightened, his grip tightening on the stinger. "What do you mean?" "The drones are down, and the core is shut off, right?" Mira stepped forward, placing her hand on the surface of the core. The runes beneath her fingers began to glow faintly. "Core, not shut off. Crystal, temporary disrupt. It will reactivate. We have little time." James frowned. Then what was the point of all that? If this thing's just going to wake up angry again. Mira interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "Crystal, key. With it, we can access deeper systems. Core may reveal paths. Supplies. Escape routes. But we must act before it reboots." James sighed, running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. "Right. No rest for the stranded. Let's figure out where this key goes." Mira led James through another labyrinthine corridor. The walls here were different, sleeker, almost organic in design. They pulsed faintly with a warm golden light, giving the impression of veins carrying energy through a living organism. James couldn't shake the feeling that the facility was alive, watching them even in its dormant state. After several turns, they arrived at a small, hexagonal room. At its center stood a pedestal, its surface smooth and dark. Above it floated a holographic projection of the planet, its surface marked with glowing red and blue points of light. Mira approached cautiously, holding up the crystal. "This is the interface," she explained. "Crystal activates it. We can ask questions." James raised an eyebrow. "Questions? Like what?" Mira inserted the crystal into a slot on the pedestal. The hologram flickered, and the room vibrated slightly as the interface powered up. The projection of the planet zoomed in, focusing on their current location, a glowing blue dot surrounded by red indicators. "Anything," Mira said simply. "If core responds, we learn." The hologram shifted, and a deep, neutral voice resonated in the room. It wasn't as hostile as before, but there was still an edge to its tone, like a machine remembering its injuries. Interface active. Identify query. Mira glanced at James, her glowing patterns brightening slightly. First, status of facility. The voice responded immediately. Facility core at 47% capacity. Self-repair systems operational but incomplete. Drone functionality at 32%. Surface integrity compromised. James folded his arms, his brows furrowing. That's bad news for us if this place decides to go hostile again. Let's get what we need and get out. Mira nodded, her attention still on the interface. Query, supplies. Food. Tools. Emergency equipment. The hologram flickered, and a section of the map lit up. Supplies stored in Sector Gamma 4. Path partially obstructed. Drones inactive. James studied the map. That's doable. We'll head there next. What about a way off this rock? Mira hesitated, then asked, query, evacuation protocols. The hologram zoomed out, showing the planet's orbit. A faint blinking marker appeared far above the surface. Orbital escape pod detected. Location, 1.3 kilometers northeast of this facility. Beacon status, inactive. James felt a surge of hope. An escape pod? That's our ticket out of here. How do we activate the beacon? Beacon controls located in Sector Delta 7, the voice replied. Warning, Sector Delta 7 security measures active. Of course they are, James muttered. Wouldn't want things to be easy. Before they could ask more questions, the facility shuddered violently. The crystal in the pedestal glowed brighter, and the interface's voice became strained. Warning, core reboot imminent. Security protocols restoring. Intruders detected. Myra's glowing patterns dimmed. Core, waking. We must move. Now. James grabbed the stinger and slung the satchel over his shoulder. Supplies first, then the pod. Let's make it quick. They hurried out of the room, following the map's guidance toward Sector Gamma 4. The corridors grew darker as the core began to reactivate, the walls pulsing with an angry red light. The vibrations under their feet intensified, and James could hear faint clicking sounds echoing through the halls. Drones, he said grimly. It's sending more of them. Mira quickened her pace, her weapon ready. We must reach supplies before they arrive. They reached Sector Gamma 4 without encountering any resistance, though the oppressive atmosphere of the facility made every shadow feel like a threat. The storage room was larger than James expected, filled with alien crates and shelves stacked with equipment. Mira began scanning the supplies with practiced efficiency. Food, here, she said, handing James several small, sealed packets. They were lightweight and faintly luminescent, resembling thick jelly. High energy. Will sustain us. James shoved them into the satchel. What else? Mira retrieved a compact device that looked like a portable generator. Power cell. Useful, for beacon. James nodded. Good. Let's grab what we can. A loud screech echoed down the corridor, cutting him off. The clicking sounds grew louder, closer. They found us, Mira said, her glowing patterns brightening as she drew her weapon. James swore under his breath. We've got what we need. Let's move. They raced back into the corridor, the sound of the approaching drones growing louder. The walls seemed to pulse faster, the facility coming alive in response to their intrusion. James fired a few shots over his shoulder, the stinger's energy bolts illuminating the shadows. One drone dropped, but more were closing in. We're not going to outrun them. James shouted. We need to slow them down. Mira scanned the walls as they ran, her glowing patterns flickering rapidly. Control panel, ahead. I can, delay drones. Do it. James said, skidding to a stop and turning to cover her. He fired another bolt, hitting a drone square in the head. It screeched and collapsed, but 3 more emerged from the darkness. Mira reached the control panel and began working quickly, her fingers moving with precision over the alien interface. The drones advanced, their metallic legs clattering against the floor. James fired again and again, the stinger growing hot in his hands. "Hurry, Mira," he shouted. "Almost done," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos. With a final press of a button, the walls behind them shifted. Heavy metal plates slid down, sealing off the corridor and trapping the drones on the other side. The screeching stopped, replaced by a tense silence. Mira turned to James, her patterns dimming slightly. Drones, delayed. But not for long. James exhaled, lowering his weapon. Then let's not waste time. We've got a beacon to activate. They continued toward Sector Delta 7, their path lit by the faint glow of Myra's patterns and the pulsing red lights of the facility. James's mind raced as he considered their next steps. The supplies they had gathered would buy them time, but the real challenge lay ahead, reactivating the beacon and reaching the escape pod before the facility's defenses overwhelmed them. As they entered a new corridor, Mira glanced at him, her expression resolute. "We survive, together." James nodded, gripping the stinger tightly. Together. The facility hummed ominously around them, its ancient intelligence waking once more. Their fight was far from over. The air grew heavier as James and Mira approached Sector Delta 7. The corridor's pulsing red lights seemed to throb in sync with the vibrations beneath their feet, the facility's core stirring back to full consciousness. James clutched the stinger tightly, his knuckles white as the weight of their mission pressed down on him. "Delta 7, Mira said softly, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Security, active. Core will, resist." James forced a grin, hoping to lighten the mood. "Seems like that's all this place knows how to do, resist." Mira glanced at him, her glowing patterns flickering in what he'd come to recognize as amusement. "Core, ancient. Defends what's left. We must outsmart it." James nodded. "Outsmarting an alien supercomputer. No pressure." The door to Delta 7. The entrance to Sector Delta 7 was an imposing wall of black metal, its surface etched with glowing alien runes. A small console was embedded to the side, and Mira immediately set to work, her fingers moving with practiced precision over the controls. "Can you open it?" James asked, glancing nervously down the corridor. The sound of distant clicking, drones on the move, was growing louder. Mira didn't look up. "Door, recognizes Caliph DNA. Will open, but triggers security." James frowned. "Security like what?" Before Mira could answer, the door slid open with a low hiss. Beyond it lay a vast chamber, its walls lined with towering alien machinery that pulsed with a menacing red light. In the center of the room stood the beacon, a sleek, obelisk-like structure that rose nearly 20 feet high. It was dormant, its surface dark except for faint, flickering lights. As they stepped inside, the door sealed shut behind them with an ominous finality. A mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "Intruders detected. Initiating purge protocol." James groaned. "That's never a good sign." The beacon room. The chamber erupted into chaos. Panels along the walls slid open, revealing automated turrets that swiveled toward James and Mira. At the same time, the floor shuddered as drones began rising from hidden compartments, their metallic limbs clicking menacingly. "Mira!" James shouted, firing his stinger at the nearest turret. "Get to the beacon. I'll cover you." Mira hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She sprinted toward the obelisk, her bioluminescent patterns glowing brightly as she dodged the laser fire raining down from the turrets. James stayed behind, his stinger blasting bolts of energy that exploded against the drones and machinery alike. The first wave of drones was manageable, but they kept coming. James gritted his teeth, focusing on taking precise shots to conserve the stinger's energy. "Anytime now, Mira," he called out, ducking behind a console as a turret's laser scorched the air above his head. "The beacon awakens." Mira reached the base of the beacon and placed her hands on its surface. The obelisk hummed to life, its dark surface lighting up with intricate blue patterns that spread upward like veins. The mechanical voice boomed again, its tone more frantic. "Unauthorized access. Core override detected. Deploying reinforcements." Myra's hands moved over the beacon's surface, her expression focused. "Beacon, connected to orbital pod. Must reactivate signal." "Almost, there." James glanced over his shoulder, his stomach sinking as more drones poured into the chamber. These were larger, their bodies bristling with additional weapons. He fired at the nearest one, hitting its central core, but the blast barely slowed it down. "Mira, we're running out of time," he shouted, switching to a nearby turret. He ripped the panel off its base and began pulling wires, disabling it before it could fire another shot. Mira didn't respond, her glowing patterns pulsing rhythmically as she interfaced with the beacon. The obelisk's lights grew brighter, casting the room in an eerie blue glow. The turning point. A particularly large drone lunged at James, its bladed limbs whirring menacingly. He fired the stinger, but the shot went wide as the drone closed the gap. James barely had time to dive out of the way before the blade slashed through the console he'd been using for cover. Scrambling to his feet, James grabbed the plasma cutter from his satchel. He activated it just in time to block another attack, the blade of superheated plasma slicing through the drone's limb. With a final swing, he cut the drone's core in half, sending it crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. "Mira," he shouted again, his voice strained. "Please tell me you're done." The beacon's lights surged, and the obelisk emitted a low, resonant hum. Mira stepped back, her glowing patterns flickering rapidly. "Signal, active. Orbital pod, responding." James felt a brief wave of relief, but it was short-lived. The mechanical voice roared through the chamber again, its tone filled with malice. "Signal detected. Escape attempt unauthorized. Facility lockdown engaged." The walls began to shift, and massive panels slid down to seal off the exits. The drones redoubled their assault, their glowing eyes fixated on James and Mira. "We need to get out of here," James yelled, firing his stinger at another turret. Mira ran toward him, her patterns glowing brightly. "Signal sent. Pod, will land nearby. We must, escape facility." James nodded, his mind racing. "How?" "The doors are sealed." Myra's eyes flicked to a vent near the ceiling. "Maintenance shaft. Leads, outside." James followed her gaze. The vent was small, but it was their only option. "You go first. I'll hold them off." "No," Mira said firmly. "We, go together." James hesitated but relented. "Fine. Let's move." The escape. Mira climbed into the vent first, her glowing patterns lighting the way. James followed, squeezing into the narrow shaft and dragging the satchel behind him. The sound of drones smashing through the chamber's defenses echoed below them, growing louder with each passing moment. The vent was long and winding, and James struggled to keep up with Myra's nimble movements. His muscles burned, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps, but he pushed on. The faint light of the exit ahead spurred him forward. Finally, they emerged onto the surface. The facility's red light still pulsed faintly beneath the ground, but the fresh air was a welcome relief. James collapsed onto the rocky terrain, his chest heaving as he stared up at the twin suns. Mira knelt beside him, her patterns glowing softly. Pod, we'll land soon. James nodded, his voice hoarse. Let's hope it's not another death trap. The orbital pod. Minutes later, a faint streak of light appeared in the sky, growing brighter as it descended. The pod was sleek and egg-shaped, its surface shimmering with a metallic sheen. It landed with a soft thud a few hundred meters away, its hatch opening to reveal a pristine interior. James and Mira approached cautiously, their weapons ready. Inside, the pod was surprisingly spacious, its controls glowing faintly with blue light. A soothing voice greeted them as they stepped inside. Welcome. Evacuation sequence initiated. Please secure yourselves. James slumped into one of the seats, his body finally giving in to exhaustion. Mira sat beside him, her glowing patterns dimming as she relaxed for the first time. We made it, James said, a small smile tugging at his lips. Mira nodded, her expression serene. Together. As the pod's engines roared to life and it lifted off the planet's surface, James allowed himself a moment of hope. They had survived the bunker, the drones, and the facility's ancient defenses. Now, for the first time, escape felt possible. But deep in the recesses of his mind, James couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The orbital pod's engines thrummed as it ascended, a soothing hum that belied the tension hanging between James and Mira. Through the viewport, the surface of the alien planet shrank rapidly, its jagged terrain fading into the vast, dark void of space. James leaned back in his seat, staring at the stars that filled the black canvas. It was a breathtaking sight, yet unease gnawed at him. This pod, he said, glancing at Mira. You're sure it's taking us somewhere safe? Mira's glowing patterns pulsed faintly as she studied the pod's control interface. Pod, follows pre-programmed route. Destination, unknown. But, she hesitated. It is. Caliph technology. It will not harm us. James frowned, gripping the armrests of his seat. I'll take, won't harm us over, guaranteed doom. But we should be ready for anything. Mira nodded. Always, ready. The arrival. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft hum of the pod systems. James dozed fitfully, his dreams filled with flashing lights and the relentless clicking of drones. When the pod's voice finally spoke, it startled him awake. Arrival imminent. Brace for descent. The pod shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of a new planet, heat flaring along its outer shell. Mira's patterns brightened instinctively, her eyes fixed on the viewport. James followed her gaze, his stomach nodding as the planet's surface came into view. It was unlike anything he'd seen before, a world of shimmering oceans and sprawling bioluminescent forests, glowing faintly even in the daylight. Towering crystalline spires jutted from the landscape, their translucent surfaces refracting sunlight into dazzling rainbows. This, Mira whispered, her voice tinged with awe. This is Calitha's cradle. James blinked. Your homeworld? I thought it was destroyed. Mira shook her head slowly. Not homeworld, but colony. A sanctuary. Forgotten, until now. The pod landed gently on a flat, rocky plateau overlooking the glowing forest. As the hatch opened with a soft hiss, a warm, humid breeze swept inside, carrying with it the scent of alien flora. Exploring the sanctuary. James stepped out cautiously, his weapon slung over his shoulder. The ground beneath his boots was smooth, almost glass-like, and faintly warm to the touch. Mira followed, her glowing patterns blending with the bioluminescent flora that surrounded them. Any idea what we're looking for? James asked, scanning the horizon. Mira's eyes wandered, her expression thoughtful. Sanctuary, built for survival. Supplies, technology, answers. But, this place feels wrong. James stiffened. Wrong how? Mira knelt, placing her hand on the ground. Her glowing patterns flickered erratically, and she drew back with a shiver. Energy, unstable. Something here, not right. James's grip on his stinger tightened. Guess we'll figure it out the hard way. Let's move. The crystal spire. They made their way toward the nearest crystalline spire, its towering form shimmering faintly in the sunlight. As they approached, James noticed that the structure wasn't entirely natural, its surface was etched with intricate designs similar to those in the facility they had escaped. A low, melodic hum emanated from within, almost hypnotic. This thing alive too? James asked warily. Mira hesitated, then nodded. Not alive, but aware. Caliph spires, connected. Part of, greater system. Like the core in the bunker. James frowned. That thing tried to kill us. Myra's glowing patterns dimmed. Spires, different. Built to protect. But, damaged. As they stepped closer, a doorway appeared in the spire's surface, materializing as if responding to their presence. Mira entered first, her bioluminescent patterns illuminating the dim interior. James followed, his weapon raised. Inside, the spire was hollow, its walls glowing faintly with a swirling blue light. At the center stood a pedestal similar to the one in the bunker's beacon room, but smaller and less ominous. Mira approached cautiously, her fingers brushing the pedestal's surface. Another interface? James asked. Mira nodded. May, reveal Spire's purpose. She placed her hand on the pedestal, and the room filled with a soft, resonant hum. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a map of the planet and its surrounding space. Points of light blinked on the map, some blue, others red. What are we looking at? James asked, stepping closer. Myra's expression darkened. Sanctuary, not alone. Red lights, hostile ships. Raiders. James swore under his breath. They followed us. Mira shook her head. Not follow. Already, here. Sanctuary, under siege. The defense protocols. Before James could respond, the spire shuddered violently. The holographic map zoomed in on a cluster of red lights approaching their location. A mechanical voice filled the chamber, its tone urgent but calm. Warning, perimeter breach detected. Activating defensive measures. The pedestal's surface shifted, revealing a set of controls that glowed with a soft blue light. Myra's hands moved over them quickly, her glowing patterns flickering as she worked. What are you doing? James asked. Reactivating, Spire's defenses, Mira said. Spires, connected. Must, protect Sanctuary. The hum of the spire grew louder, and James felt the ground beneath his feet vibrate. Outside, beams of light shot into the sky, forming a shimmering barrier that surrounded the spire and the surrounding area. That should keep them out for now, James said, gripping his stinger. But we're still stuck here. Mira nodded, her focus still on the controls. Spires, hold key. Must reconnect, network. Reconnect the network. You mean there are more spires? James asked. Mira gestured at the holographic map. 5 spires, linked. Network, restores defenses. Without it, Sanctuary falls. James sighed. Let me guess, we have to go to each one and fix them. Myra's glowing patterns brightened slightly. Yes. Together. The first assault. Before they could plan their next move, a deafening explosion shook the spire. James ran to the doorway, his heart sinking as he saw raiders swarming the shimmering barrier outside. Their spindly vehicles fired plasma bolts at the shield, each impact sending ripples through the glowing energy. Mira, he shouted. They're testing the barrier. How long will it hold? Mira joined him, her expression grim. Not long. We must move quickly. James nodded, his jaw tightening. All right. Let's fight our way to the next spire and figure this out as we go. The raiders outside roared as they launched another volley of plasma fire at the barrier. James raised his stinger, his resolve hardening. We've survived worse. Let's show these guys what we're made of. Myra's patterns pulsed brightly, her determination matching his. Together, we survive. As the barrier began to falter, James and Mira stepped into the fray, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would fight to protect the sanctuary, and their chance at survival. The shimmering barrier flickered like a dying flame, each plasma blast from the raiders' vehicles sending new ripples of instability through it. James gripped his stinger tightly, his heart pounding as he and Mira prepared to leave the relative safety of the spire. Mira, are you sure about this? He asked, glancing nervously at the glowing controls she'd activated. Myra's glowing patterns pulsed steadily, her determination unwavering. No choice. Spire network, key to survival. Without it, sanctuary falls. James nodded, steeling himself. Then let's make this count. The first push. The barrier gave a final shudder before collapsing in a cascade of energy, the raiders' triumphant howls echoing across the plateau. Vehicles roared forward, their spindly legs clawing at the rocky ground as heavily armed raiders disembarked. The group moved with terrifying efficiency, their weapons glowing ominously in the dim light. James didn't hesitate. He fired the stinger at the nearest raider, the energy bolt striking its chest and sending it sprawling. Mira was beside him, her smaller, more precise weapon taking down another before it could retaliate. The two worked in perfect tandem, their movements fluid as they fought their way out of the spire's immediate perimeter. We need cover. James shouted over the din, his eyes scanning the terrain for any advantage. His gaze landed on a cluster of crystalline outcroppings ahead. There. Go. Mira darted toward the outcroppings, her glowing patterns flashing like a beacon. James covered her retreat, his stinger's energy core growing hot in his hands as he fired shot after shot. The raiders pressed forward, undeterred by their losses. James ducked behind the crystals just as a plasma bolt seared past his shoulder, scorching the ground where he'd been standing. They're not letting up, he muttered, reloading the stinger. Myra's voice was calm but urgent. Next spire, west. Must reach, before raiders. James peered around the edge of the crystals, gauging their odds. The next spire loomed in the distance, its shimmering form faintly visible through the glowing forest. The raiders had begun to fan out, their vehicles tearing through the alien flora with reckless abandon. Let's move. James said, bolting from cover. The forest fight. The bioluminescent forest was breathtaking, its glowing trees and vibrant plants casting eerie shadows over the ground. But James barely noticed as he and Mira sprinted through the undergrowth, their focus entirely on survival. The raiders were relentless, their shouts and plasma fire cutting through the serene hum of the forest. One of the raider vehicles barreled toward them, its legs crashing through trees like they were paper. James stopped abruptly, raising his stinger and firing at its front leg. The energy bolt hit its mark, and the vehicle stumbled, crashing into a cluster of glowing vines. Mira finished it off with a precise shot to its power core, the resulting explosion lighting up the forest like a miniature sun. Good shot, James said, his voice breathless. Mira nodded, her glowing patterns flickering. No time. Keep moving. As they pressed deeper into the forest, the raiders' numbers thinned slightly. The dense vegetation slowed their vehicles, giving James and Mira a small but much-needed advantage. They reached the base of the second spire just as the raiders regrouped, their shouts growing louder in the distance. Reactivating the network. The second spire was similar to the first, its towering crystalline structure humming faintly with dormant energy. Mira approached the pedestal inside, her glowing patterns intensifying as she worked quickly to reactivate the spire's systems. James stood guard at the entrance, his stinger ready. "How long do you need?" he asked, his eyes scanning the tree line for movement. "Not long," Mira replied, her voice steady. "Spire, damaged. Takes time to synchronize." James cursed under his breath as the first raiders appeared, their weapons raised. He fired at the lead raider, the shot hitting its shoulder and sending it sprawling. More followed, their plasma bolts streaking through the air. "Hurry, Mira!" James shouted, taking cover behind a crystalline pillar as the raiders opened fire. "Almost there," Mira said, her hands moving frantically over the controls. The spire's hum grew louder, and James felt the ground beneath him vibrate. A surge of energy shot up through the spire, and the pedestal emitted a low, resonant tone. Mira stepped back, her glowing patterns dimming slightly. Second spire, online. Network, stabilizing. James fired one last shot before retreating to Myra's side. 2 down, 3 to go. "What now?" Mira pointed toward the horizon, where the next spire's faint glow was just visible. "Next spire, north." But raiders, closing in. The ambush. James and Mira pushed forward, their pace relentless as they navigated the forest's dense undergrowth. The sound of raider vehicles grew louder, their engines roaring as they closed the distance. James's instincts screamed at him to prepare for an ambush, and his suspicions were confirmed when plasma fire rained down from above. "Get down!" James shouted, dragging Mira behind a massive tree. The glowing branches above them disintegrated under the assault, showering them with fragments of bioluminescent bark. The raiders had set up a blockade ahead, their vehicles positioned strategically to cut off the path to the next spire. James's mind raced as he analyzed their formation. "They're trying to pin us down," he said. "We need to break through." Myra's patterns flared. "We distract them. Split forces." James hesitated. "You want to split up? Are you sure?" Mira nodded, her expression resolute. "You, strong. Draw their fire. I, take hidden path." James clenched his jaw but trusted her judgment. "Fine. Be careful." Mira gave him a faint smile. "Together, we survive." James nodded, stepping out from cover and firing at the raiders. "Hey! Over here," he shouted, drawing their attention. Plasma fire converged on his position as Mira slipped away, her movements swift and silent. The breakthrough. James fought with everything he had, his stinger growing dangerously hot in his hands. He fired at the raider vehicles, aiming for their power cores and taking out as many as he could. His cover disintegrated piece by piece, and he knew he couldn't hold out much longer. Just as he was about to retreat, a surge of energy lit up the forest. The third spire activated, its protective barrier flaring to life and forcing the raiders back. Mira appeared from the shadows, her weapon glowing faintly. "Spire, secure," she said, her voice calm but tired. "Raiders, retreating." James exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. "You did it. Nice work." Myra's glowing patterns dimmed as she leaned against the spire for support. 2 more, to go. James offered her a hand, helping her to her feet. "Then let's finish this." Toward the final spires. With 3 spires activated, the sanctuary's defenses were beginning to stabilize. The raiders' forces were dwindling, their attacks growing more desperate. But James and Mira knew the hardest part was yet to come. As they set their sights on the final 2 spires, a sense of quiet determination settled over them. They had come too far to fail now. Together, they would fight, survive, and reclaim the sanctuary. "Ready?" James asked, his stinger at the ready. Myra's glowing patterns flared brightly. "Always." With renewed resolve, they pressed forward, the sanctuary's fate resting in their hands. The final battle was near, and they were prepared to face it together. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. For more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon, so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.